Australia's political leaders often state that Australia is a trading nation. This reflects the fact that trade has been key to Australia's national prosperity and wealth over time. This is because Australia is a relatively small population and has classically been a medium-sized economy. Yet at the same time, Australia is endowed with vast amounts of natural resources. In fact, far more than its population could ever hope to use. By drawing on international trade, Australia is able to sell these resources internationally, generating revenue streams while at the same time facilitating other countries' national growth. At the beginning of the 19th century, the first Australian wool was sold at market in London. This began a long and prosperous trade, initially with Britain and in the rest of the world, first in agricultural goods and later in resources such as coal, gas and iron ore. Indeed, during this early period of the 20th century, wool remained Australia's top export right through until the late 1960s. Around this time, Australia began its first minerals boom. It was during this period that commodities such as coal, gas, iron ore and later lithium became Australia's top exports. These mineral exports powered the industrialization of major countries such as Japan in the 1960s and 1970s, which for a long period of time during the late 20th century was Australia's largest trading partner. Later, China became Australia's major trading partner, and again, Australian mineral commodities were absolutely essential to China's modernization and industrialization, particularly from the period of the 2000s onwards. In more recent times, trade in services such as international education and tourism have also driven major export earnings for Australia. In fact, international education is often a top 5 trade export for Australia. On the import side, Australian consumers benefit from being able to import goods and services of multiple trading partners all over the world. This substantially improves Australia's consumer lifestyle as well as generating revenue. Therefore, international trade is not just about export and growth and jobs, it's also about building a better consumer lifestyle for Australian consumers at home. A central part of international trade during the 20th century and in current times are free trade agreements. Free trade agreements are negotiated agreements between governments that oil the wheels of trade. Negotiations include reducing tariffs, which are essentially a tax on imports, reducing their costs and allowing exporters to send more goods abroad. To allow international trade to proceed smoothly, governments negotiate free trade agreements. Australia has a long history negotiating some of the most important free trade agreements, including being an original signatory to the 1947 General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which was the foundation agreement for the World Trade Organization that emerged in 1995. Australia has 19 free trade agreements. These include bilateral agreements where Australia negotiates one-on-one with other governments, including most recently the United Arab Emirates, which was finalised in 2023. Australia also negotiates free trade agreements with regional blocs, countries. These allow like-minded groups of countries to develop trade rules that are appropriate for their economies and to proceed with trade liberalisation where in the multilateral domain, such as the World Trade Organization, sometimes this is more difficult. In particular, the World Trade Organization has 166 members currently, and this creates major difficulties in trying to agree to new rules. During free trade negotiations, government negotiate and agree to standardised rules and transparent regulatory processes. These are essential in facilitating businesses in Australia to expand their exports abroad and also allow international businesses easier access to Australia's market. Again, this in turn generates revenue streams for Australia, but also allows for a greater import of goods and services, improving Australian consumer choices. At the end of 2024, Australia has 2 important free trade negotiations underway. These are with the European Union, which has a massive internal economy of 500 million consumers, and also with India, another key strategic partner with a large, very large economy and population of 1.3 billion, which could have significant growth in the future. Historically, free trade agreements have been focused on ensuring economic efficiency. However, in recent times, trade resilience has become more important for governments, particularly after issues around COVID revealed that very efficient supply chains were not necessarily very resilient. Therefore, future trade agreements are likely to factor in other criteria beyond economic efficiency, particularly including measures that will improve the resiliency of global supply chains and also support Australia to diversify sources of imports and exports. Nonetheless, trade will remain essential to Australia's economic prosperity for the foreseeable future.